Now, I know this is the fourth week in a row for the podcast, which, for those of you that pay amazingly close attention to our little slice of the internet, you'll probably then be thinking, wait a second, Rebecca, there shouldn't be a new episode right now. There should be a photo tips email in my inbox instead. First of all, don't fret. Do not worry. The free photo tip email is still coming your way. It's just coming next week instead of this week. If you've already listened to last week's interview with Lucy Fagella, then you know there is a lot happening on my side of the computer right now. Because last week, we officially launched the community. The community has been a dream of mine for quite a while now. And for the last 3 months, I've actually been digging into the technical options available to make it a reality. I won't dig into the myriad of reasons to be crazy excited about this right now because we have an awesome chat with Kenny Singh of the one and only Turn Studio awaiting for you today. But the Cliff Notes is this. If you want to continue the conversations we've been having here on the podcast with other maker friends worldwide, if you've been dreaming of a place online where you can come ask questions about how the heck to make a living from the things you make, and get intentional support around that from others dreaming similar dreams as you, or if you want support in making those dreams a reality by taking bite-sized, meaningful, tactical steps towards our goals together, then come learn more at makersplaybook.com/community. More on all of that at the end of this episode, though, because first up, I'm excited to peel back the curtain just a tiny bit on how Kenny Singh manages all he's doing over at Turn Studio. While I know many people have asked me how the heck I managed to balance my time between 3 different businesses, I had a very similar question for Kenny when I realized he's not only working full-time in the highly demanding web development space, but also creating those ridiculously intricate forms he's so well known for, all while at the same time building a community-focused studio space. Kenny approaches all of this with an intention of helping and educating others, which I clearly deeply admire. But in today's episode, he's also sharing the harsh realities of how long it might actually take to break even on that studio, let alone make it sustainable. Yes, even with nearly 83,000 Instagram followers. You heard that right, my friends. 83,000. So enough for me. Let's dig in. Welcome to the Maker's Playbook, the podcast where we talk all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. I'm your host, Rebecca Ikes-Kara. Hey, Kenny, welcome to the podcast.
How's it going? Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited about this interview in a completely different way than I expected now because editing it is going to be so easy with this beautiful audio quality that you have.
Yeah, I hope it's coming through.
It's going to be fantastic. Before I get ahead of myself, for people who don't know you, how would you introduce yourself in the context of this podcast?
For a long time, I described myself as a hobby potter, but recently, now that I have my own studio and I'm getting a little bit more into production pottery and selling my work and promoting myself as an artist and as an instructor. I don't know what the word for it is, but it's not a hobby anymore. It's definitely, I don't like calling it a side hustle. It's more of a second job, a second part-time job. So full-time, I'm a graphic designer and I work in the web design software space. Won't get too much into that, but pretty much every day I'm finding myself in the pottery studio, which I do have where I live. I'm not like traveling to a studio or anything. So it's really convenient setup. And I get to do it as much as I want or as little as I want, which is really beneficial for my lifestyle. And as of late, I've gotten really into hosting workshops and retreats at my studio. So it's a balance between making my own work and then also fostering the ceramics community on the Central Coast of California.
That's amazing. We're in the Central Coast again?
San Luis Obispo.
Gotcha. Cool. And is this fabulous loft that I see behind you, is that home and studio together?
Yes, this is home and the studio is that way outside.
Gotcha. Same property though, like you said. That's amazing. Did I see too that were some of the workshops you're hosting like collaborative. Was it Kevin that was out at your studio, or am I making this up?
No, Kevin's been at a couple. The first one was a Raku retreat. So people came out. I know you've spoken with Kurt Hammerly. He made an appearance, and a couple other artists that are in the big Instagram space. But that was less of a collaboration thing and more of just they happened to sign up and show up and be a really cool group of people. And then the second one that Kevin showed up at was actually I brought him here to teach a workshop. So he was like a visiting artist.
Cool. That's was the last part is what I was kind of leading to in terms of time management for you. If there's a vision yet for the space, or if that was something you were considering, because between graphic design, full-time job, part-time job, making your work, part-time job, opening up a studio space to share with other people, there's only so many hours in the day, as we all know.
Yes. Honestly, bringing out visiting artists is nice because I don't have to spend so much time worrying about the running of the workshop. That's what I bring the artists here for. I'd like to do it more often. It's a little bit, from a business perspective, a little harder to do because you have to make sure that you do sell enough seats to pay those visiting artists and make sure that those artists are comfortable with their traveling to the area. And, if the workshop requires certain materials and equipment that you're not used to housing yourself. So, pros and cons.
Yeah, of course. I mean, convincing people to come to the Central Coast of California in February, for those of us in the Midwest, it's not a hard sell. I'm just
Yeah.
gonna Well, how did you originally get into clay? Kind of walk us backwards for a little while.
Yeah. So back in 2005, 6, I was in high school and just taking the standard art classes in high school. And I had a really awesome set of art instructors that they were just really good at like sculpture and 3D design. So I was a very visual learner as a kid. I was very good at grasping 3 dimensions. And I was in this art class, and we weren't doing anything with clay necessarily. It was like more of sculpting with cardboard or plaster of Paris. There was definitely like kind of the hand building stuff we would do. I think we probably made a few pinch pots and tiles and things like that. But there was an instructor in the art department that was secretly really big into wheel thrown pottery. And I was the second class of my high school. And so the art department had a pretty decent budget to get started. And this guy, the head of the art department, he was just like, well, I'm going to spend a bunch of money on pottery wheels and kilns. And in the back of the classroom, there was, I don't know, I want to say maybe a dozen or dozen and a half pottery wheels, and then 2 big gas kilns and an electric kiln. And I had no idea what this stuff was. I was 15 years old. I didn't care.
I also
And
want to know the funding for this high school, because like my Illinois public school self over here is like, what?
I know. And we, like, all I knew in high school was gas kilns. It wasn't, we bisked in electric, but all I knew was high fire reduction. And I didn't learn any of that. The instructors were doing it all.
Oh gosh, yeah. Can you imagine the liability issues of having 15-year-olds
Yeah.
fire?
Yeah, and we just don't understand or care about the concepts of anything like that. One day at lunch, that instructor unwrapped a pottery wheel basically and started throwing on the wheel. And I remember seeing it for the first time, and it was definitely capturing. And so afterwards, I kind of asked him, hey, how can I learn this, or can we do this in class? And so I ended up coming in before school for a really long time, for a couple years. And I guess I actually only did pottery for like 1 year in high school. So about a year, I came in before school a lot, stayed in at lunch a lot. And then by the end of my last year in high school, my instructors were letting me come in on Saturday and watch them adjust the dampers on the gas kilns and introduce stuff to the kiln. And I honestly can't remember any of that stuff. It was just really cool seeing the glowing red and helping unload the kilns and just seeing the transformation of a kind of a dusty glaze to something that's as beautiful and complex as reduction firing.
I feel like that's such a good sign for any teacher, but also just I don't know. I don't know what the finish of the sentence is. The high school kid who is willing to do the extra things on the weekends for whatever hobby or craft or sport or music or theater or whatever it is It's like when you're willing to like stick around school for more hours than is actually required of you to do this thing, it's pursue that. Look into
Yeah.
that. But
Yeah, I was really fortunate that I had a couple teachers that they put a lot of effort into my art education,
yeah.
and I think that was probably because I was putting a lot of effort into it as well. But anyways, when I graduated from high school, I got into Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, so college here in this town, and I went for structural engineering, civil engineering, and it was pottery was cool. I'm gonna miss it. I wasn't going to school to be an art student, and one day I walked into this random art studio that happens to be on campus, and it had a giant pottery studio in it. And it had a woodworking studio and a glass studio and a bike making, surfboard shaping, all of this stuff in one little studio.
Only in California is there a surfboard making studio on campus. I just need to put a pin in that statement and then
Yeah.
continue.
Yes. And so it was all extracurricular and all student run. So the staff was all students, the everybody that ordered everything, everybody that instructed the courses, structured the courses, everything was run by the student body. And it was open to the community. So anyone in the community, adults, kids, could take these classes or just go to Open Studio. And it's still there. It's called the Craft Center. It's in the middle of campus. And so as a sophomore, I applied to be a ceramics instructor, but I really only had a year of ceramics under my belt. And I got good enough just practicing on my own to get a teaching position. And I ended up getting the job and taught beginning and intermediate ceramics for 3 years. And so that was really when I started doing pottery a lot on top of school, doing pottery probably 5 hours a day, including the teaching and teching and glaze making and firing the kilns. And so I was really fortunate to have the exposure to something like that for free or to get paid to do it. And even for all the people listening that know how much a community studio pass costs or their own personal studio costs, the classes there, I think still to this day for a 6-week class, I think is like $60. And this includes open studio, glazes, firings. You pay for your own clay. They have the clay there.
Oh my gosh. That's fantastic. And I'm also laughing out loud at the or not out loud, silently, nobody can see us on Zoom kind of thing, at like teaching before you really are qualified because the year that I had the most exposure to clay when I worked in the UK, I was working at this art center for at-risk kids in Newcastle, and the woman who helped run the ceramic studio there found out she was pregnant and was gonna be stepping down from her position, and I had this interest. I had been, like, helping and assisting in the pottery lessons, and she's like, "Okay, it's electric kiln, everything's already pre-programmed, like, you hit this and this to start it, you hit this and this to run a glaze firing,
Yeah.
here's how you center on the wheel, and there you go," kind of thing, and every time they were 8 to 12-year-olds, and there was 2 wheels, and so we would do, like, hand building, pinch pot stuffs, and wheel they would be able to switch off and on the wheel, and anytime somebody was like, "Ah, I can't do it, I can't get it, you just finish it for me," like, on the wheel, I was like, "No, you have to see it through," like, in this teaching moment when really it was just because I couldn't center any better than any of the rest of them. I didn't
Yeah.
wanna be outed by these, like, 9-year-olds.
But it was like because it was student run, the competition for actually getting a job there was like not that high.
You
Yeah.
didn't know that?
Yeah. I learned really quickly and picked up. But when you teach pottery, you also are learning. It was a pretty cool intro into doing pottery, quite a lot of hours.
Did you finish with the engineering degree and then route over to graphic design, or did you switch how bring everything together?
Yeah, so when I was a senior in high school or the summer after my senior year, so I had gotten into college and had a kind of a summer to figure out stuff. And I ended up getting a graphic design position at a screen printing shop. Actually, I got just a grunt worker job at a screen printing shop and saw the graphic design side of things and got really into that and was all of a sudden the graphic designer at the company. So I picked up graphic design really quickly, which obviously if anybody knows my work, is very apparent in my work.
That and the
But
engineering side, I was like, "Oh, everything comes together now." But yeah,
yes, so I was doing a lot of graphic design, I was doing a lot of screen printing, I was doing a lot of pottery, and so about a year and a half into engineering, I was getting a little bit worried that it wasn't gonna be the creative job that I originally thought it was going to be. I was still interested in math and science and all of that jazz. I just wasn't I was a little bit timid for what the desk job afterwards was gonna be. And I was really loving art and design at the time. So I ended up switching my major, staying at Cal Poly. And it's a crazy switch. It took me almost a year to switch my major, applying and getting rejected from the department. And so eventually they were going to kick me out of the school because I wasn't taking any engineering courses while I was an engineering major. And so they're like, all right, we know what you're trying to do, but you have one more chance to apply and get in. And if you don't, unfortunately, you're on administrative probation and you've been warned. And so I ended up finally getting in, which is great. And so I basically finished a 4-year degree in like 2.5 years. And I tested out of a lot of classes, so it wasn't like I was like killing myself, but I was taking probably, I think consistently for 2.5 years, I took 20 plus units. And so it was a lot, and graduating with a graphic design degree with a emphasis in like advertising. So a lot of like branding, no digital at all, no web. And so that was something that I learned on the job. And kind of right when I first graduated, I stopped doing pottery for a long time, like years, multiple years, just because life and full-time jobs and all that. And
access to resources and
yeah, and I wasn't teaching at the studio anymore. I still had access to it. I could still go, but after working a full 8 to 10-hour day, it wasn't like as easy to just walk over to the student union and do some pottery. And so ended up going up to San Francisco about a year after graduating, and it was super expensive to do pottery up in San Francisco, and so still wasn't
super
doing.
expensive to do anything in San Francisco.
Yeah. Yeah, so,
Yeah.
like, on top of trying to pay rent with a entry level job, it was tough, but ended up getting introduced to Clay by the Bay, SF, which is a giant pottery studio up in San Francisco, and was a member there for the past 6 years before I moved here.
I didn't realize that we had so much synchronicity just in our like 20-year-old undergraduate lives because I switched out of the music school into the graphic design program at DePaul
Oh, wow.
and graduated with more credits than like it I practically graduated with enough credits for 2 degrees, but just
Yep.
because the music school classes don't like it's not like you're going from marketing to communications where half the classes you already took apply to the degree that you're getting. So basically 2 years worth of music school classes just became more electives than anyone ever needed to have.
Right.
Like nobody would ever have that many elective credits ever again. And I did the exact same thing. Switched 2 years in, still graduated in 4 years because it was just like
Yep, gotta get it done.
go, 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 which was nutty. But
I know it's crazy to think back, like, probably should've just done 5.
yeah, but then we'd go into the whole conversation around like cost of higher education in the US and
Oh,
yeah,
I
everything
yeah,
has worked out. We're fine.
yeah.
We just weren't maybe the like most lackadaisical of undergraduate students.
Not at all.
Yeah, no, we had like music theory classes at 8:30 in the morning while everybody else was like rolling back into their dorm room.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
I love it. I love it. Well, this also makes sense how asking about managing the job between graphic design and making your own work and hosting workshops is just it's just another day, no big deal.
Yeah.
What has the shift into what is now I'm going to make with a capital T business name Turn Studios like how has that come to be if you will? Was it like okay, you like so many of us you're making your work and I can't store this stuff anywhere else so I got to start selling it or has it really gone full throttle since moving into this new space?
Yeah,
Total
that's a
accident?
good question. At one point, I was commuting in San Francisco, and the company had commuter shuttles, and I had access to Wi-Fi, and I was just on my laptop during the commute. And this was a couple months after finding a pottery studio in San Francisco, so I was doing like a lot of pottery again, and pottery on Instagram was taking off. If people remember back in, I don't know, it's probably like 5 years ago where it was like just really taking off.
Yeah.
Like people were getting a ton of views for just throwing a vase on the wheel, and it was just like,
Or even just a regular old photo, right? Heaven forbid,
yeah.
you didn't even have to make a freaking video.
Yeah, and I was like, it'd be nice to, like, capitalize on that trend, and I had my commute was, like, sometimes an hour 45 one way, and so it was just like, how can I use this time to do something productive other than just working? And so I, at that point, just created a brand because I wanted to split my Instagram from my personal into just like a pottery account. And being the designer and branding and marketer that I am, I was like, oh, it'd be really cool to come up with a name and come up with a brand for it, more because it was just like a fun branding project. And honestly, I don't know how I even landed on the name Turn Studio, but there was a, very intentional decision behind calling it a studio when it wasn't. And it was just I want it to sound official. I want it to potentially evolve into a studio.
Mhm.
And if and when it does, it would be nice if the brand was established as a studio. And at the time, I really didn't want to be like the face of the brand. And in retrospect, I kind of regret some of that because I think that I wish that I was a little bit more the face of the brand. I'm working on that.
You did
But
just recently post your face on Instagram, so that's exciting.
I know, big news. But I wasn't selling my work. It wasn't even to sell my work. It was more to post my work under, for lack of a better term, like the guise of something official. And it was all video. I only posted video. It was all process. I'd never posted anything finished, nothing glazed, nothing fired. And so it was very much based on the process because showing the finished work of the kind of stuff that I was doing was, oh, cool. And then the only question you're going to get is like, how long did that take you?
Or also, where can I buy it? I feel like when it's finished, it's, oh, this is
Yeah.
an object I can have now.
Yeah. Except it was like so unpriceable because it was, I was just developing my process and a single piece would take me months sometimes. And it was just like on and off
Mhm.
because I wasn't able to do it all the time. And that's from throwing to trimming to designing to firing it once to finishing it, firing it again. It just takes a really long time, and the pieces were really large scale. And so it was like, well, I can try to sell these for a few $1,000s. It doesn't make sense to me. And so I really wasn't selling anything, and I didn't have an online store. And we're talking about 7 years ago, well, 5 years ago. It
Mm.
wasn't like popular to have an online store for your art that wasn't built on, something like Etsy or something like that. So for many years, it was really just an Instagram account, to
Like
be honest.
everybody else's.
Yeah, it was just an Instagram account. Honestly, I wasn't selling anything. I would sell stuff to friends or to friends of friends, or if someone contacted me on Instagram and it made sense to do a commission, I would once in a blue moon. But not until the end of last year, or I guess 2 years ago, I was like, okay, I have a website. I have a way to sell stuff. I'll post some stuff here and there. And since I've done that, stuff has sold pretty well. Just because the batches are so small, that stuff sells. But not until I moved here into this new studio, which was about 1 year ago in the beginning of January, I started making enough work to say, okay, I'm doing a shop update,
Yeah, yeah.
the dreaded shop update, and it was me learning and developing my process in a way to where the work wasn't $3,000. It was something that's a little bit more consumable, and
There's a world for that. It's just selling to very different people in a very different way than a shop update on Instagram, probably.
100%. And just like people don't talk about it enough, but just like dealing with shipping and taxes and everything that goes into selling online. You're selling a photo. You're not selling something that someone can go and pick up with their hands and feel and touch and see the imperfections or see the nuances of something that's handmade. It's like this curated photo that tries to make it look better than it really is. And then you're hoping it doesn't break in the mail or hoping that you charge enough for shipping to not lose money on something.
Forgot to account for having to pay taxes at
Yeah.
some point, potentially. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think everybody stumbles through some of that in the beginning of trying to sell online. And so I did that as little as possible. I tried to stumble as little as possible, which is probably why it took me so long to actually sell my work because I was just so timid. And finally was like, I just need to do it and I'll make mistakes and it's going to work out. So I wanted Turn Studio always from the very beginning to not just be me making work and selling work, but
Mm.
have it be an educational space because that was how I got into pottery. I was teaching at Cal Poly, and so I really get more fulfillment out of teaching than I do making. Making is a great, I guess, release for me, and just like doing something creative that's not my job. Like I'm so creative during my job during the day that it's almost doesn't feel like creativity sometimes. And it
Yep.
was for me, my making has always been like, how do I just push everything to the limit, in complexity and scale? And that's more of a challenge just for myself to try to see if I can do things. And now it's almost like figuring out how I can make work to sell, which is a totally different mindset. But I don't want that to be the thing that I'm always thinking about. So thinking about workshops and thinking about the big thing is like fostering community is like a huge thing here. And I've noticed that it's really hard to find ceramic community here, even though there's a ton of potters in the area. Nobody knows of each other. And that's like a huge problem. So it's been really cool to run workshops and see locals show up and meet each other and be like, oh, I used to go to that studio, or I've known that person as well for the last 5 years. And so it's been really cool seeing people connect the dots here and hopefully continue to do that over the next few years.
That's fantastic. And also is such a good reminder as far as like as connected as everything feels with the internet, there's still these gaps in access or in availability of resources or whatever other reasons out there to not forget the importance. I mean, there's nothing that beats in-person community also. As much as I also want to like create a safe space to create community for makers and the clay community at the same time, like nothing can beat sitting down at a table, having a drink together, firing together, like just doing something in person.
Yeah, and that's what's been really cool about the retreats out here is that half of it's pottery and half of it's we cook a meal together and we sit down and eat, and that part has been the thing that people walk away with the most, and they say, "Oh, you know what? I could have just not even done any pottery this weekend. It was just fun just hanging out, and it's a beautiful space." And so feel very fortunate that people want to come out here and spend a weekend.
So just out of pure curiosity, and there's a few other points I want to come back to and dig deeper on, but before we get off talking about the studio, did you build the studio like purpose built for yourself? Like,
No, it's a retrofitted, like, 35-year-old barn. It's not insulated, it's just kind of a redwood barn. It's large, it's, I guess, what is it? 1,200 square foot barn with a full loft, and it's got concrete floors, but that's about it. So we did all the electrical in it for the kilns, the wheels, and built all the tables and ripped out a lot of stuff that was just in there from previous owners. So a lot of it's been just like a subtractive process of getting it to a place where we can finally start adding stuff like kilns and wheels, and but it's still definitely a work in progress.
that sounds exactly like our house. Both in the square footage and the subtractive process. Except we have our beds here also.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was honestly like the first thing when looking at the place. It was just like the first thing you see, and it was just like, I gotta make this happen.
This is the funny thing about, and we will dig into other things, but I just want, it's just topical to my mind right now because Francesco and I were talking about with a good friend of ours, Andrew Linderman, who's a potter also, who we accidentally moved 3 blocks away from when we moved to Milwaukee. And he's in the process right now of moving to Madison. And the house searching process for potters is like
Oh.
an untapped real estate niche that somebody needs to get on
I know.
because the needs that we have are weird and bizarre and very specific, and like the properties that some people I feel like would look at and be like, not our thing. We're all like, we can totally make this like actually
I
the
can put a kiln
unfinished
there.
space. Right, exactly. Andrew was saying like they saw one house and they had a fully finished basement, and he was like, "Oh, that's not gonna work. Actually, we need an unfinished basement."
That's really funny.
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But what I do want to kind of hit everybody over the head with really is talking about how much time you really spent developing your process for the sake of the process
Mhm.
and sharing that process for no other reason other than to share it and to document it, and not it wasn't like some planned out master marketing plan to this is how I'm going to sell my work. It was like you, from what I was hearing at least, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I was hearing is you were making stuff using the skills you had years of experience with when it comes to that engineering brain and the graphic design thing
Mhm.
to create your unique style, but it also still took years of figuring out that process to be what everybody sees on Instagram right now as this like sensation, so to speak, right?
Yeah, I think that, like you said, it wasn't this ploy. It was really scratching my own itch, and I was doing a lot of, like, animation at the time, like, learning, motion graphics, and so if you look back, like, really far back on my Instagram, like, some of the first stuff, I was putting, like, motion graphic stuff over the top of my process, and it was really just completely, superfluous to the actual ceramic process, but it was visually pleasing. It was cool to see, and it was definitely, like, unique content for the Instagram, and
Yeah.
it was something that just kind of took off. I didn't expect it because it's just such a random thing, like graphic design and pottery being combined and not even showing the final work, not selling the final work, not talking about the final work. It was I was definitely growing an audience that was not just potters, I think, and yeah, it turned into this thing where people, like, really appreciated the process, and I was finding that people were interacting with me and saying, "Hey, have you tried this?" Or, "You could do this," and honestly, sharing my process and I talked a lot about this on Instagram recently, but it was something that I found was, like, kind of like me going through a ceramics degree or like without going to school for it because I was getting feedback. I was like going through critiques, but it was just like all through Instagram. And so being open about my process fostered a lot of conversation and it fostered a lot of suggestions from other artists. And so I found the platform really cool just to connect with other people and to help evolve my own process. And it was interesting. Like I tell my team that I work with to post on social media, not to get followers or to sell work, but because if you're willing to post something on social media, that usually means you're pretty proud of it. And if you find that you're not posting enough on social media, it probably means you're not making enough work that you're proud of.
It was
And
literally the sentences that were used by people when they just signed up for the photography course, because it was
yeah,
like, "I like my work, but I don't like my photos."
right, and so it was kind of like, for me, self-accountability, right, to create high quality work that I was proud enough to post, and it raised the bar for myself, and it just I don't know, it made me want to try new things so that I was posting fresh content. So it was and still today, my Instagram kind of feels like this, it's just constant research and development.
That's really interesting. I really like that idea in terms of using it as an accountability place to push yourself to create something that you're proud of, but also that you're, proud to share as well. That's a really great reframe
Yeah.
for the Instagram hustle, if you will. That's awesome. And I think the other piece of it too is just in the uniqueness of your style that you took the time to explore that without the pressure of sales, right? Because I think at least from my perspective, a lot of the artists I see online that really have that distinct, like I see their work somewhere, whether they're posting it or whether somebody else is sharing it, and I know that's theirs, only comes not only there, I'm sure there are other ways, but so far of the people I've talked to or the people I follow, it seems to be that, je ne sais quoi, like clear style is coming out of something completely separate from getting interested in pottery from 1 6-week community course and then selling your stuff on Etsy right away. Pot black, I'm guilty. I feel like I can say that out loud because I'm the girl who started selling stuff way sooner than I ever should have because I didn't have any storage space left, so no shame.
Yeah, I think because I was always framing my relationship with ceramics as teaching,
Mm.
it was never about selling the work, and every time I presented myself on social media, it was hopefully to shed some light on process and technique, and I feel gross saying this sometimes, but I am really fortunate that I'm able to do pottery and not rely on it to pay rent. I am putting a lot of work into it, so I don't feel too guilty saying it, but I think as I have gotten into selling work, I'm really fortunate that I'm selling work that I really like making because I've been able to establish myself in the space because of stuff I like doing versus potentially having to make a bunch of stuff that I don't necessarily love doing because I need to make money. And so that's a whole nother conversation. But it's, I think, just the one thing that's important is that I am making sure that I'm pricing my work as if I am. I have to price my work like I am making a living off of it. And it's not fair to other people to undercut prices or to devalue handmade ceramics because I could potentially do that.
That's exactly where my brain was going as you were saying that. So I'm so glad that you put that out there. Not to mention, if for no other reason, you clearly have that same community value underpinning that I feel like I have as well. But for somebody who doesn't have that and just wants to think of it for themselves, like for no other reason than if the goal one day is to make a living from your ceramics and you're not selling at that point, it's that much harder of a climb.
Yeah.
If just to take out the moral complexity of it and just say, okay, look, if you just want to make a living from it, you have the freedom to price it where it needs to be priced and not worry about paying for your groceries. That is the time to do that because it'll be that much easier.
Yeah, but honestly, like, I still with all of the pottery that I sold last year, I still didn't even get close to covering cost of kilns, cost of electricity to run the kilns, cost of the extra money that I put into a piece of property because it had enough space for the studio. Glaze materials, clay, wheels, like, it adds up so insanely fast when you're building a studio that honestly, for the first couple years, it's probably going to be taking quite a bit of a loss, even though that I am making and pricing my work, you know. And honestly, with the amount of hours that still go into my work, I'm probably still not pricing it right. But it's not like I'm just making side cash. Like I'm
Right.
technically losing money running a pottery studio right now. Not to discourage anyone from doing it, but
I appreciate you saying that though, because that's exactly the candidness that got me started making this podcast in the first place. It's just this is what it actually looks like. And I feel like sometimes I'm like the Debbie Downer of ceramics podcasts, but it's it's just what it is.
no, it's good to understand that, especially with Instagram and the sheet that kind of just like blankets what's really behind everything. It's not like all these huge Instagrammers are just jumping on a bed of money at the end of the day. Photography is another one where it's like people gasp at how much a wedding photographer costs. If you had any idea just how much these 5 cameras that I have in my bag cost, you kind of start to understand.
Yep. Oh man, I'm gonna resist the temptation to dive down that rabbit
Yeah.
hole. But didn't you know I only work Saturdays? What else do I do the rest of the
Yeah.
week, Kenny? I swear, don't ever ask a wedding photographer. Dear friends, don't ever ask anybody in the wedding or events industry what they do the rest of the week. Let's just make that statement and move on with our lives. Oh, shoot. One other thing you said earlier, too, that I wanted to circle back to was the realization of just having to open the shop, having to do the thing to figure out the mistakes to learn. Because I do think that is something that holds so many people back, at least in the conversations I'm having,
Mm.
as far as the desire to figure out every single step and then launch, which just there's steps you're not even going to know exist until you put it out in the world.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest one is with online is to me, it's figuring out shipping. And a lot of people will agree with that because everybody's using a different platform, everybody's using a different way to do shipping. You could be doing flat rate, you could be doing built-in shipping, you could be trying to say like I don't ship internationally or I do ship internationally. You could get as crazy as saying if you're buying in these counties or these zip codes or these states, then you get hit with this kind of shipping. Do you charge sales tax based on where your shop is or based on where the buyer lives?
There's a legal answer to that that people should find out. Just FYI, just want to put that out
Yeah,
there.
just look up your state, which one you're supposed to do. It's someone bought something from a country that requires a customs label, and so you have to figure out how to print that stuff. Pottery is not only fragile, it's very heavy, so it's like shipping, you think it's, "Oh, it's gonna be just a small box, it'll cost $5 to ship," and then you go and it costs $25 to ship. And so those are the biggest things you're probably going to stumble upon, or stumble over when you're first starting. You might realize that you didn't charge enough for shipping and you just lost a bunch of money trying to sell work. But start small and try to sell 5 or 10 pieces, and or 2 pieces, one
Yeah.
piece, and just see what it costs to go buy a box, go buy packing material, take it to the post office, maybe buy insurance on that. And all that stuff takes time. And that's why when you read shipping and handling, not just
Yeah.
shipping, right? There's a lot of handling that goes involved and a lot of packing material that is involved, and you end up definitely undercharging when you're getting started for packing and the time it takes to pack. I remember when I first did my kind of first big shop update, I did a huge kind of like Instagram story following it up saying like, these are all the things I learned from my shipping mistakes. And like in the system, I had put in the dimensions of the actual piece, not the dimensions of the boxes. When I was trying to auto calculate shipping,
Oh,
adds like 4 inches in all directions when you get into packaging. And so at the end of the day, because my e-commerce platform ended up getting me like some discounts on shipping labels, it worked out. I didn't undercharge too much. I definitely didn't. I definitely ate some cost. And I remember Adam Field, he was like, "Oh, what about all the time you spent packaging stuff?" And I was like, "Ha, you're so silly. You don't get paid for that." You know? So it's you have to think about that when you're charging for the actual piece. You want to charge for the artwork all the way from ideation to actually making to actually the materials, firing and all that, and what it costs to actually get this thing into somebody's hands. So that's why a mug that some people think should be $15 can be $100.
yeah, absolutely. And one of the hardest mental shifts when you're doing something that you love and you would be making anyways as a side hobby, it tends to be a difficult learning curve to learn to charge for your time, to learn to value your time in that way where you feel comfortable and confident saying, in order to pay my mortgage and buy my groceries and whatever, you have to account for the 15 minutes it took you to wrap up the mug that just got ordered and package it, and the 10 minutes it takes you to drive to the post office, and the who knows how long it takes to stand in line at the post office and whatever else. Like otherwise, there's no way to make it last.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people get really nervous about charging for that stuff in the beginning because they're not good at it. So they think, "Oh, it didn't take someone who's really seasoned doing this. It didn't take them as long to package. It didn't cost them as much to package. They knew what they were doing, so I shouldn't have it's not fair for me to charge for those things." And maybe it's not, and that's just something that you sweep under the rug when you're getting started and you just learn how to get better at those things. But there's a balance because you're never going to be perfect at it. What I tell people, it's like, how do I charge my ceramics? Oh my gosh, there's that's like the biggest like multifaceted answer on the planet. But I think that for me it was like when I made a sale, when I saw that sale come through, was I like, "Oh my god, I can't have to package this up." If that's the feeling you have, you're not charging enough.
That's totally fair. I also think the same is true from a making standpoint, right? Like somebody who is a hobby potter who just got started a year ago or 6 months ago or whatever is not going to throw at the speed that someone like
Right.
yourself or Francesco is going to. Like when I start to tell people his production pottery skills, they're just like, that's nonsense. That doesn't even that doesn't equate in my brain. Like I can't throw a row of mugs the way he can by any stretch of the imagination. But that doesn't mean he should charge less per mug than I should because he's actually more proficient. The skill set is higher. And so there's also kind of a certain balancing act of like, well, if it takes you 3 days to make one mug just because you're not proficient at the craft, that doesn't necessarily mean you should be charging $100 for it or more.
Mhm.
But then at the same time, as you get more proficient, your speed increases, but that also means the value increases because you're more skilled. I'm sure there's a number somewhere where it balances out.
We can keep the topic on mugs because it's easy to talk about. It's a funny example because 1, it's so functional, and 2, it's so excessively cheap.
I was going to
And
say a pain
and
in the ass to make,
it
but that's a different.
I just mean not as makers, like, as what people view a mug. It's something that you probably grew up spending a dollar or 2 on at a department store, and it's just a mug. It's not a piece of art. And it just so happens that this art that we do and make, a lot of people want it in the form of a mug. And if you think of a skill like painting, a painting is most of the time, not to generalize, it's going to be a painting that you hang on the wall.
Right, right.
Right? There is and then you charge for the painting. But for us, we're making a lot of stuff that's very functional and that has a precedent with regards to pricing in the world, right? A bowl, a cup, a vase, things that you can buy for literally $1. But we're just happen to be making art in the form of something that's functional, that people sometimes have a hard time paying extra for. Yes, you're buying a mug, but you are buying a piece of artwork. You're buying a painting that you're drinking out of. You're buying a sculpture that you're drinking out of. And you can't just say that every mug should cost this much because every artist is putting a different level of knowledge and craft and time into those things. And so for me, there's plenty of artists that are doing similar work and charging whatever for that work. It's important that you do your research and look at what similar work to yours is selling for. Maybe you don't charge as much because you feel like it's not as good as what somebody else is charging for similar type of work. But then you also have to realize you're undercutting and which is fine, but I don't know, we have to make sure that we're continuing to remind people that are not ceramicists that handmade pottery is something that should be very valued.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much crossover with photography now with ceramics in terms of just the access to like anybody that I've interviewed, anybody anywhere could go tomorrow and pick up a camera. And if you take enough shots, you'll get a few decent pictures and you can put those on a website and call yourself a photographer and be hired. And yet, the value that people bring with different experience levels, then the point of that being you could hire somebody for $50, you could hire somebody for $50,000, and
Yeah,
it's all over the board. And that's also going to be the case for ceramics. And I don't know if that's ever going to go away, also. So I think it's more about educating consumers and audiences about why it is the way it is, and not just in the sense of here's my costs of clay, materials, firing, and all of that. That's valuable. I enjoy it when people are sharing those too, because it gives people very tactical things to be like, oh, wow, I didn't know every piece had to be fired twice and that
right.
costs, et cetera, et cetera. But then there comes to a certain point too, where it's just like your time is valuable and you have to be the person to decide how much you need to make per hour for your livelihood. You living in California have a completely different set of costs to analyze compared to me to Wisconsin, to compared to somebody in the UK where they have healthcare regardless of how much they make. It always comes back to healthcare. Every day that should be like the subtitle of this this podcast. Those things are not things you can know just by going to Etsy and looking at what somebody else is charging for a mug.
Right.
You don't know if that person has a partner who's providing for the bulk of life expenses and this is fun money, or if it's somebody who needs to pay for 3 kids to go to elementary school with selling their pots. Who knows?
Yeah, and that's why it's so hard to charge for something that can feel so subjective. Get your work out there, maybe start with your prices low and gradually raise them versus going the other way around, but it's always going to be a hard answer and a hard question. So,
We should have a completely we've come to this like really heated and important topic as we approach an hour, which I feel like is just the greatest of possible cliffhangers.
yeah, I guess the moral of the story is that there isn't a great answer, but to also not be afraid of it.
Especially if you're testing it out before you're relying on it. This is my biggest piece of advice to anybody. If you have the ability to keep an income somewhere else and test this stuff out before it's required of you to make an income from it, is literally the safest place you could put yourself in. Not only because you can test out making work that you enjoy, as everybody has talked about, and figuring out your style and all of that, but also just the practicality of, okay, let me practice getting confident enough to sell a mug for $50 if that's what I need to sell it for, and learn more about sales and work on that. So if and when the time comes that I have to sell 100 mugs for $50 this month in order to pay my mortgage, you can do it with confidence rather than
Yeah.
putting yourself in a desperate place.
And I think it's the same for starting any business. Probably don't quit your day job until you can prove that whatever you want to do works out. If you have the ability to, you have enough money saved to quit whatever you're doing and go full time, you also see success stories there as well. So it's definitely doable. It really comes down to how risk averse you are.
Yes, exactly. What habit, dare I ask? I feel like there's so many other places we could also still go with what you're producing and everything that you're doing and managing. But is there something that you feel like you really wish people would know, or a question you get asked all the time, or a question maybe you don't ever get asked that you would love to share for people who are getting into clay, wanting to make this more a part of their life and figure out how to make a living from the things we make?
Oh, it's an interesting question for me because I already share a lot. So anything that I want people to know, I tell them.
The answer can just be
uh,
follow me on Instagram
yeah.
at Turn
Oh,
Studio.
yeah, Turn Studio. No, but I think the biggest thing with ceramics, anybody getting started, and even seasoned potters is this is hard. Like, it takes infinity years to get good at this, and I think that's what's also amazing about it. It's like this thing that is so complex, and not to call pottery more complex than other hobbies, but it's extremely, extremely complex. Like, you have people that are amazing chemists and amazing material engineers, amazing artists, amazing sculptures, amazing painters, all good and able to carve out their own space in ceramics, which is just so rare in an art form. There are a lot of similar art forms, but this is just one that's so mainstream that it's amazing that it's a mainstream. It's you don't realize that when you're in a community pottery studio, how much work the techs are doing, how much stuff that the studio managers are doing, the studio owners are doing to make your life enjoyable at a community studio. And I just urge people to understand like what's going into it. You don't have to learn it. I don't know glaze chemistry. I don't make my own clay. We're buying a lot of this stuff. And it's nice to say ignorance is bliss. But for me, I constantly learning because I constantly feel like, man, I would really wish I knew more about the ins and outs of all these materials that I'm using. It helps you appreciate the art more. It helps you understand pricing and understands how to price your work and potentially what it does mean to start your own pottery studio and make decisions like, am I going to buy pre-made glazes? And where am I going to source my clay from? Where am I going to source my glazes from? Where am I going to buy a kiln or a wheel? And for me, I've just been trying to be transparent about what it means to start a pottery studio. And I'm not that transparent about it. Like, there's definitely a lot more artists out there that share more about building their pottery studio, but I'm rambling now. But I really just want people to understand the process that goes into this work. I didn't really talk about it too much recently about like why I share my work, but a lot of it is to justify the price, right? All my work for a long time was like sped up, like 50 times faster than it really took. And so when I show stuff in real time or even just like at double speed, I get a lot of comments of like, man, that takes a really long time. It's like, yep. Yeah, it does. And so I think that for a long time, pottery was idealized on Instagram. Like, look how fun and relaxing and easy and beautiful this all is. And then you like pan over and there's clay everywhere. Your camera's covered in clay. You have 50 fails for the one piece you made. You have an hour of footage to go through on your phone. I think it's important for people to know that there's
Yeah.
a lot of work that goes into this. And it's like, taking your first yoga class ever, not fun, but it can be.
That was a great metaphor. The one I was thinking of in my head was for any of the baseball fans or Tom Hanks fans out there is the quote from A League of Their Own when he
There's no
says,
crying in baseball.
well, there's no crying in baseball also, but also he says, and I had this as my screensaver for a very long time, if it wasn't hard, everybody would do it.
Yeah.
You
But
know?
everybody's doing pottery.
Okay, touche.
I think it's amazing. I'm all for bringing pottery to the masses. I think
Yeah.
it's amazing to see how many people are getting into it. I think it is so cool being a veteran in a space that feels so new and trendy to a lot of people. And
Yeah.
it's like fun trying to be like a role model in the space.
I'm excited that it's a space where the role models are also very community minded and building responsible places and all of that. We need more industries like that too. So
100%.
thank you for your time.
Yeah,
I
thanks for having me.
For people that don't know, we alluded to it just to make it super clear. Where can they find you, your work, everything you're sharing with the masses that are coming to pottery?
Yeah, so if you just want to observe what I'm doing, things that I'm trying, the latest day by day, you can follow me on Instagram at Turn Studio, or you can just search my name, Kenny Singh. That'll show up as well. And if you want to purchase work from me or find out about workshops and classes, you can go to my website, www.turn.studio or turnceramics.com. And that link is also in my Instagram bio. So, really, easiest places to find me on Instagram.
Awesome. And I will link all of that in the show notes.
Thank you so much.
And with that, we wrap up episode 304 here on the Maker's Playbook. Now, I realized we tiptoed around the subject of pricing, and I can already imagine the emails I might be receiving as soon as you listen to this. More on pricing, please, Rebecca. That wasn't exactly a solution. Can you tell me more? Is there a once and for all solution to pricing our work? It's a big subject, I know. And I will hopefully be working on other interviews or a solo episode or whatever you might be interested in. Feel free to email me what you want to hear. We'll work on it to bring more clarity and insight around pricing your work. But here's a shameless segue. Subjects like this, how the heck to price your work, are exactly why I am so excited to have finally launched the community. You see, here's been my experience so far on the internet when it comes to ceramics. There's a couple of massive Facebook groups out there, and while you can post a question in them and receive some very well-intentioned responses from other members, oftentimes those responses don't have a lot of context around them. And if there's one thing a subject as sensitive as pricing needs, it's context. What one potter needs to charge who's doing this as a side hustle with no plans of going full time is radically different than what another potter needs to charge to pay the mortgage and buy groceries and put kids through school or buy the dog some great treats or whatever else it might be. The cost of living in a major city in the US is totally different than a rural town in the US, which is also totally different than those two scenarios, a major city or a rural town, in any other country. Just to simplify it, all of these only graze the surface on the subject like pricing your work. But having conversations about these factors are integral to deciding how you personally should be pricing your work. Candid conversations rooted in context are what has me so freaking excited about this online space that we now all can have access to. But on the other hand, random conversations on the thousands of different questions we all have, pricing, shipping, using Instagram, handling tricky customer situations like refunds, photography, taking videos. The list goes on, and mentioning them probably just stressed you out a little bit. Those thousands of questions all at once might feel a little bit overwhelming to you. Overwhelming, like a Facebook group, maybe. So that's exactly why part of the last 3 months of working on building this online home for all of us makers has involved me planning out some monthly themes to help us all stay focused on taking baby steps towards big goals. The intentionality here and the obsession with planning and systems should not surprise you if you've been hanging around my chunk of the internet for a very short amount of time. Everybody knows this. But here's the point. Whether you're side hustling or full-time, more likely than not, there's not enough hours in the day to do everything you want to do. And I've learned the hard way over the last 12 years of self-employment that the best way to achieve those big goals is by taking small, bite-sized steps each week. And that is part of what I hope will make the community unique in the months and the years to come. Putting it as succinctly as I possibly can, the community exists to be the online home for aspiring makers to have candid conversations and a supportive environment in order to take meaningful steps towards building not only a small business of their dreams, but a business that is rooted first and foremost in the life of their dreams. If any of this has piqued your interest, even just a little bit, you can check out way more details about the community at makersplaybook.com/community. One more time, just in case you need to wipe that mud off your hands, it's makersplaybook.com/community. I hope to see you inside our online home soon. Until next time, my friends, go get back to making your dreams a reality. Because together, we've got this.